Today I'm going to be taking a look at a fun little camera called the HTC RE. Now, to get full functionality with this, you do need to pair it up with a smartphone, and coming from HTC you might assume that's just an Android device, but it does work with both Android and iOS devices. Now, inside the box, we'll just quickly go through the things. You've got a quick start guide there which gets you up and running, a USB-A to mini-B cable for charging and data transfer, a wrist strap and a little plastic cap that attaches to, which also seals the bottom of the camera. Now, in the bottom of the camera you'll notice you've got a standard tripod screw there, which is a plastic one, and behind this little fiddly cover here, that's where the micro SD card is. It comes with an 8GB one, class 4. I swapped mine out shortly afterwards, but it is a little bit of a fiddle getting it into there, so what I'd suggest is put a nice large card in there. It will take up to 128 gigs, and once you've got it in there, just leave it there and get the data off using the USB socket. Now, as far as that little grey cap goes, well, it protects the USB socket, but it also enables you to attach a wrist strap to the camera, as you can see there, and of course that would stop you from dropping it. As far as picking it up goes, though, that turns the camera on. It's got a sensor inside here, it can tell when it's been picked up, and that switches it on, so there's no on button. Now, as far as the rest of it goes, at the bottom, that's a little speaker for beeps, an LED, a slow motion button on the front, and a shutter button on the back. Let's see how this thing works. So to take a photo, just tap that, and it takes a still. You can see every time I press it, you get a little red light flashing in there, and you get one on the front as well. Now, if you want to take video, instead of tapping it, just hold it down. It does 2 beeps, and as you can see there, it's now flashing, which means it's currently recording video. And of course, if you want to stop it recording video, all you have to do is just tap the button. It goes back to that standby mode. Now, to do slow motion, hold the button on the front, and it does 2 beeps. Blue light comes on, it means it's ready to take slow motion video. So holding down the button starts it recording video, but this time it's slowed down video. It creates a file that when you play it back, everything looks like it's working in slow motion. I'll show you one of those in my sample clips. In fact, as far as the sample clips go, let's cut to the chase and show you some of those. Now, usual disclaimer applies. Sometimes YouTube can mess up the quality of these a little bit. I've got some samples available to download if you want to see the true quality of these clips. Now, inside the camera itself, when you get it, you think, what's this? Has someone been using this? Because it comes with these photos. I haven't been to these places. These were actually inside the camera, as well as this nice little time-lapse video. So it gives you an idea as to what the camera can do. But down to earth with a bump, let's just have a look at some of my footage now from rainy Manchester. Well, inside the shopping centre here, I've got the ultra-wide setting on. I'll talk about those settings later, but there's two. There's ultra-wide and then there's normal. So this is ultra-wide 1080p 30. Look how much you can see left and right, top corners, top and bottom as well. Now let me just show you a still I took from the same location because it demonstrates something quite well. Look at the edges of the image. Notice how you can see more in the still. The reason for that is because the video I was showing you, in there I had digital image stabilization switched on. That's a nice feature to have in a camera like this, and it's quite unusual as well. But what it does is it nicks a little bit off the edges of the image, but it's fine because it's still a really wide image. Now let's just have a look at a normal one that hasn't got ultra wide switched on, and there's a bit of a weird effect. Notice that this looks like I'm looking into some sort of amphitheatre, some circular area, because look at the top there, how it curves around. You'd imagine this is a circular courtyard I'm looking across, and in reality it isn't. This is a square. We'll go back to the ultra-wide again just to demonstrate the difference between the two, and you can see that the ultra-wide provides a clearer and also more realistic image. Now let's go through some of the other video modes. This is what 720p 30 looks like. Now, in a camera like this, I don't really see the point in using 720p 30. You might as well use 1080p 30, but I suppose somebody somewhere might want to use it for the longer recording times. Now, look at this here. This is the slow motion mode. I've got it set to that ultra wide again on the settings, but this is what slow motion looks like. Now, the video quality on slow motion isn't that great. You would have thought it was just 720p shown in super slow, but in reality I think it's a smaller size resolution. If we look at this close-up here, you can see the text on the side there. That's the slow-mo freeze frame. So let's just jump over. That's the normal 720p 30. You can see it's quite a bit sharper. I think the super slow is probably somewhere less than 720p, and then it's upscaled to that for output. It's an interesting effect, but it's not the best quality. Now let's have a look at some other shots I've taken around town. Some of these will be ultra wide, some won't. I can't remember which are which, to be honest, but you can see here I've got the stabilization switched on. It does produce a bit of a weird effect if you're shaking the camera around too much. As you can see here, it's kind of a bulging effect, and you can switch that stabilization off. I'll show you all those settings later on. But going into the Printworks here, I just want to show you how well it copes in low light. It's a really good camera for low light, this one, and also in bright sunlight, which I'll show you later on. This is what the 1080p 30 mode looks like without the ultra wide on, just to give you an idea. And we'll just switch it into the ultra wide now using the app that I've got on my phone, and that's what that looks like. You can see a little bit more there. There is, of course, barrel distortion. You get those kind of effects in cameras like this, but it's not as pronounced as in quite a few of the cameras that I've used that have ultra wide angle lenses, so it's good in that regard. Now, slow motion video is of course just high frame rate video, which means that each frame gets less light into it than it would if it was shot at a normal rate. So low light environments produce pretty poor quality slow motion video. You're much better off outdoors or in a very bright environment, so bear that in mind if you plan on buying this camera just to shoot video of your cats jumping around inside your house. Now let me just demonstrate with this shot the difference between using the built-in super slow motion mode as opposed to just slowing down normal video. As you can see in this shot here, people are moving past in super slow-mo, gliding past, whereas if I show a 1080p 30 video that I've slowed down to 25%, you can see the difference is quite noticeable. So even though the slow motion mode is a bit low in resolution, it produces quite pleasing results. Another feature of the camera where you might have to take the rough with the smooth is the digital image stabilization. As I mentioned earlier on, it can produce some, should we say, unusual side effects where things seem to bulge in and out towards the camera. However, on the plus side, it does make a shot like this when I'm walking along viewable, whereas without this stabilization, if it was switched off, this would just be a shaky mess. And of course you do have the option to switch it off if you prefer, if you don't like the effect that it produces. One area where I think this camera really excels is in its ability to cope with different lighting environments. I mean, look at the length of the shadow on that person there. The sun was really low in the sky. But when I pan the camera around, you don't notice the usual exposure lighting steps that you might get on some lesser cameras. Going from a darker environment to the bright sun, other cameras would jump as they adjusted the exposure, whereas this one just seems to shoot it naturally. But it's not just bright sunlight where this camera gets things right. In low light environments, it does pull a lot of detail out of the scene and a lot of colour, and it doesn't introduce any grain. Normally, if you were to shoot in a scene like this, you wouldn't see those colours from the restaurants on the right or the yellow street lights, because quite often cameras just mute all the colours when things get dull, and the images almost end up black and white. The sound quality is good as well, so let's just have a listen to this chat for a second.
But everybody's gone. I've been here far too long to face this on my own, my own.
You'll have noticed the wind noise coming in at the end there. It was a very windy day, but I'm afraid wind noise is going to be something you're going to have to live with. It's going to be pretty much unavoidable on a camera with a tiny microphone hole on the top of it. Another thing that's going to be unavoidable is barrel distortion or fisheye effect. It's the effect you get when you pan around with a wide-angle lens and it looks like you're looking out from the inside of a globe. I do receive emails from people asking me whether I can recommend any small ultra-wide-angle lens cameras that don't exhibit barrel distortion, and the answer is no, because it's impossible to do it. You can't have a small wide-angle lens without some sort of results like this. However, in this camera the effect is definitely less pronounced than in some of its rivals. I'll quickly show you some stills that I shot with the camera. These are in the 12 megapixel 16:9 ratio mode, but of course on YouTube you aren't going to be able to see them at 1920 by 1080, so if you want to see the true full resolution images, I've got those available to download from the link in the video description. One thing I will say about the photo mode though, in low light you do have to hold the camera very steady to avoid getting blurry shots. Now let me show you what the iOS app looks like for the RE. So of course download it from the App Store, it's free. You then have to connect up to the RE using Wi-Fi and launch the application, and then it enables you to download the video that you've shot that's on the camera's memory card. You can look at the photos or the video or the time lapses that you've shot. I haven't talked about time lapses yet. I'll talk about that in a second. You can get into the settings for the camera, and in there you can choose between 1080p 30 or 720p 30. That's it. Those are the different photo resolutions that you can see on the screen now. Here's where you turn on or off the ultra wide angle mode. Definitely worth leaving that on, I think. And then the camera sounds, you can have it loud, soft, or definitely worth turning it off if you're going to be using the time-lapse mode. Otherwise it makes a noise every time it takes a still. These menus are largely self-explanatory. Of course, at the top you can change the name of the device as well as the password for the Wi-Fi, and at the bottom there you can see that you can turn on or off the video stabilization and the orientation sensor, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on. And in this final menu you can format the SD card inside the camera, which is the recommended way to do it, as well as update the firmware on the camera, and you can see I had an update on the 29th of December for mine. Away from the settings menus, you get into the live viewfinder screens. So across the top you can see what the camera can see. Below that you've got three icons. The left one lets you take stills, the middle one video. If you click the slow motion at the bottom left, it takes slow motion video. And on the right you've got the last icon, and that's the time-lapse or interval photography mode. If you click the 15 at the bottom left there, that gets into the settings for that. And you can adjust quite a few different things when you're taking time-lapse video, and you can adjust the interval down to 1 second, and then you can choose the way that it's going to play back. I'll show you a time-lapse video that I shot with mine. It's not the best because I had to sit inside a cafe and shoot outside because it was raining, and I had to sit here for quite a while. All the benches were a bit wet, but you get the idea. That's what a time-lapse video looks like. That's 1 frame every second. Now, as well as outputting the time-lapse as a proper finished MP4 video that you can just play back, it will also store all the individual JPEGs, the stills that made up that video, so you can do whatever you want with them later on as well. From reading previous comments and questions, it appears that a lot of people overestimate the abilities of a Wi-Fi connected viewfinder. They imagine they can put a camera in a model plane, for example, and stand on the ground and look at things from a pilot's eye viewpoint. They don't work like that. You get a few feet out of them and the motion is quite jerky, and it also has a lot of lag. This camera is no better or worse than any other Wi-Fi connected camera in that regard, but I did notice that it seems to take quite a long time to send the files between the camera and the iPhone. Even though it's supposed to use wireless N, you can see even on a small clip like this, it's only 6 seconds long. When I press play, I get buffering until it's loaded enough video into the phone to play it smoothly. Now, of course, because it's connected up over Wi-Fi, that means that you can't actually use the Wi-Fi on your phone whilst you're connected to the camera. For example, if I try to do AirDrop, I don't have a Wi-Fi connection to my network, so I can't do that. So you're better off just saving it to your device and then doing something with it later on when you're connected up to the Wi-Fi network. I find it, of course, much easier and quicker to use the USB port and pull the files off the memory card that way. The files, of course, MP4s and JPEGs. Let's have a look at the bit rates for those. These are all variable bit rates, but 1080p 30, 16.7 megabits a second, 720p 39.4, and slow motion video 6.2, and it is only 720p. 20 frames a second video. I found that 10 minutes of 1080p 30 video takes up about a gig on a card. You can go up to 128 gigs as a maximum card size on this camera. Those are the weights and heights, dimensions and things at the bottom. Battery life 90 minutes. That's in my test of recording at 1080p 30 continuously. To extend that recording time, you can, of course, power the device as well as recording at the same time, but the lead would get in the way if you tried to put it down on a surface. So to get around this, you can put it into a charging cradle, which enables you to power it from the side. And something like that would enable you to do really long time-lapse photography. There are other optional accessories available for the camera as well. There's a clip so you can attach it to belts or items of clothing, a suction cup which could come in handy, and a bar mount so you could put it on a bicycle or perhaps a motorcycle. It appears that the camera itself is supposed to be waterproof up to 1.5 meters without any additional case, but I've got my concerns. I mean, that USB port at the bottom there is exposed, of course, unless you put this cap on, but the cap itself has a little tiny hole in the side, which is where your wrist strap goes through. So I don't really know how they've managed to do that, but I'd definitely take it out in the rain, but I don't think I want to take it underwater. Now earlier on I mentioned an orientation sensor. The way that that works, if you start recording with the camera upside down, when you play back the video on your computer they're going to be the right way up. If you start recording with it on the side, the video will still be on its side, but photos will end up as vertical photos. If, however, you start recording with it the right way up and then flip it halfway through recording, nothing changes. It only does the orientation once at the time when you start recording. The camera will briefly tell you the battery level. It only says whether it's above 25% or under, but you pick it up and a light just shows quickly on top of the camera there. You have to be quick to catch it, and also as far as that light goes, it's very hard to see outside because of this mirror finish. If you get the sun on that, you just can't see whether that light's flashing or not, so it's worth leaving those sounds on to tell you when you've started or stopped recording. Now, to save people the time and trouble of typing a message asking about a feature on the camera, I just want to reiterate what's shown on the screen there. If you haven't seen it during the course of this video, then the camera doesn't do it. I've showed you all the features and all the setup menus. Now, that being said, the camera can have its firmware updated by the manufacturer, so features could be added in the future. And with that in mind, I've got a request. The slow motion mode on the camera, whilst fun, isn't something that I plan on using in the future. However, the time-lapse mode, I think that's quite a novel feature and it seems to work really well. So I'd like the manufacturer to add the option to change the button on the front that currently activates this slow motion to instead activate the time-lapse feature, and it could pull through whatever settings I'd previously set using that application, but it means that I wouldn't have to connect the camera up to my phone every time I needed to use the time-lapse feature. Now, all those really hilarious guys who say the most obvious thing and think they're the first person to spot it will say that this looks like an aspirin inhaler or a periscope or an air ventilation tube off a ship, but what they're not realising is the design actually makes a heck of a lot of sense. You've got a good grip on the camera, so it's not going to fall out of your hands. The button on the back there is just where you want it to be for your thumb. The microphone hole on the top is out of the way, so you're not going to cover that up with a finger, muffle the sound. It's actually a really good design. And I really enjoyed using the HTC RE. In some ways it doesn't quite perform as I'd like, but that time-lapse mode, I'm really intrigued by that and I plan on using that again in a future video. It's not the cheapest camera around, but it's definitely something worth considering. Anyway, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.